I'm Eli Miller. I'm 26 years old, I'm a lifelong New Yorker, and I'm a huge fan of butterscotch brownies, freezing cold kettle ponds, and the first movement of the Mendelssohn Octet. Well, we're finally here. Election Day is this Tuesday. Our journey has reached its final destination, probably. Campaigns are all about narratives, themes, messages, policies, all right-brain, creative, humanities stuff. But election night itself is different. It's all about maps, graphs, numbers, needles, counting votes, and projecting the share that's still outstanding and how it will break. You need an army of dedicated election map nerds to understand what's going on. So I'm incredibly excited to have Michael Lange on, who I consider to be the premier map nerd for New York City elections. Lange writes a Substack called The Narrative Wars, and he covers the right-brain stuff too. His coverage of the narrative aspects of the horse race have been excellent all year. But he also has the kind of neighborhood-by-neighborhood, even block-by-block knowledge of the New York City electorate that you need to handicap an election like this. We went through his projections for Election Day, how different demographic groups might show up, and for who, and what benchmarks each candidate needs to hit to stay competitive. Here's my conversation with Michael Lange. All right, Michael Lange, thank you so much for joining us here on Primary School. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. Little backstory here is that I ran into Eli's parents early voting on 102nd in Amsterdam, and they ironically, they said, because I was doing exit polling, I was interviewing people, and they said, oh, we ranked who Eli told us to. And I said, Eli Northrup, like the guy who ran for 69th Assembly District, also a friend of mine. And they said, no, Eli Miller. I said, oh, okay. And they're like, wait, you know who he is? I was like, yes, this New York City political Substack community is very small. Very few people actually write and give opinions. So,
thank you so much. It was a very thrilling text exchange to get from my parents. So I've been a huge fan of Michael's writing since the last election, and for sort of the same reason, there's just not that many people actually getting in there and writing about this stuff. But especially, I think you bring a level of specificity and detail, and also just like predictions that it feels like very few other people are willing to bring to this. And your predictions have a pretty good track record. So I think you're a voice that everyone's turning to right now. I see your Twitter absolutely blowing up, especially thrilling to be on there or have my parents be on there for a little bit. And they really enjoyed meeting you, of course. So let's jump in. Why don't you what the hell is going on right now? Tell me your impression of the race. You basically, you see it as just basically Cuomo versus Mamdani. There's not really a third candidate in the wings that you think has any serious chance. Is that right? And then also, how do you see, we're recording this on Monday morning, the New York Times just released their, I guess you could call it endorsement of Cuomo, but in the most sort of avoidant language possible, where they're like, don't rank Cuomo, but don't rank Mamdani even more, so maybe do rank Cuomo. I mean, just like, we'll link to it. But so yeah, how do you see the race going, and how much is that New York Times endorsement affected?
Yeah, so state of the race. I mean, this has been talked about ad nauseum, but there was a real lane for a third non-Cuomo, non-Zoran candidate, but that lane is just not really materialized, very crowded. Obviously, Brett Lander, Scott Stringer, Adrian Adams, Zellner Myrie, all would have been, I think, pretty credible and interesting candidates to kind of fill that void if it was maybe a less crowded field, but no one has kind of broken through or emerged there, not quite met the moment. So as of now, 8 days until primary day, people have already started voting. I think there's probably a 1% chance that a non-Cuomo, non-Zoran Mamdani candidate wins. And I think as of now, I would probably, I don't want to be a prisoner of the moment with the New York Times editorial board. I would probably say that Zoran Mamdani is around a 33% chance to win. I think Andrew Cuomo is probably hovering around 66, 67%. We'll put 1% aside for a crazy scenario where someone else emerges, but that's kind of
Whitney
how I see
Tilson.
it. Yeah, right. Yeah. Eli and Whitney. That was a great podcast title, I think.
Oh my God.
Whitney Tilson, he probably would have been better off running in the general election. And I think Cuomo, we're going to get a Marist poll tomorrow. Obviously, a lot of rumors that he'll be up in that, but, we have to wait and see. But I think just in terms of fundamentally in the city, even with some type of turnout surge amongst Gen Z millennials and the like for Zoran Mamdani. Cuomo is still, I would say, favored in, a good, favored like without a doubt in like a third of the city's assembly districts, and he has a really high floor. No one's really been able to like drag his numbers down. And I think in a race like this, where the other candidate also, to a degree is polarizing, having that high floor is really going to matter. I think Cuomo has, compared to, Eric Adams is kind of a good comparison to him because they're backed by a lot of the same people. Not all, of course, but there is a lot of there was an establishment kind of migration once Eric Adams was weakened to Cuomo, and I think Cuomo won't be able to turn out black voters to the same extent that Adams did. Eric Adams actually he had really phenomenal turnout in some of these black neighborhoods, particularly in Brooklyn. He won gentrifying neighborhoods like Bed-Stuy and Crown Heights resoundingly. Because for as many young people were turning out to vote for Maya Wiley, he really got black seniors to the polls. And kind of my question is whether Cuomo, to the same degree, will be able to inspire those levels of turnout when there's so much kind of enthusiasm in other parts of the electorate. But he still will get in the range of Adams' support in the black community. I think what's interesting is that with South Asians, I anticipate that Cuomo will struggle with the East Asian electorate. I really think that'll be a toss-up. I think he'll do very well in like Bensonhurst and Gravesend, on the backs of Bill Colton and Susan Swang. But I mean, there's a real question how he does in Manhattan's Chinatown, Elmhurst, Flushing, of the sort. But the big differentiation with Adams is that Eric Adams was crushed in Manhattan and in these very civically engaged areas, in places like where we live, the Upper West Side, Morningside Heights. He was destroyed, like 4-1 margins. And I think Cuomo of Westchester, of Sutton Place, daughter's last name is Kennedy. I don't think that he'll be getting destroyed in Manhattan. I think actually they're pretty confident that they might win. And if they win Manhattan, I think it's probably over. But at the very least, that the floor here is higher than maybe opponents think, and then certainly higher than what Adams is. And I think that gives him a lot of insulation in terms of if you're a white candidate, but you can run up the score with black voters, but you're also not toxic to large segments of the white electorate, it's very hard to beat. So that kind of segues very well into our New York Times editorial board non-endorsement this morning, which was, okay, let me start with like trying to parse it objectively because I have a lot of subjective thoughts. It read to me, they said some nice things about Brad Lander. They gave Whitney Tilson a little shout out, but it read to me as like a rank Andrew Cuomo, don't rank Zoran Mamdani. And I think, certainly not as effective as if they would have done this in May or really gone hard, but it doesn't feel like it's nothing. Now, granted, this is where we get into the subjective part. It was long-winded, rambling, seemed reactionary and somewhat incoherent to me. I mean, people are kind of panning it online, but I think also what was interesting is that they really took a hatchet to Bill de Blasio and kind of progressive governance at a whole. And it very much struck me as we kind of switch up our opinion page a bit, and we're kind of doing this Bloomberg era zag and Trump 2.0. And I thought that was interesting in terms of where does that leave like the classical liberals in the city. This is kind of a theme I talked about specifically to Brad Lander, but it's much bigger than that, where I do kind of see the city's politics breaking off into three more distinctish groups. And this race was kind of an embodiment of that, where you have like the very ideological lead.
Can I actually guess the three groups?
Yeah, go for it.
Just from your writing? Because this was actually going to be literally my next question, where
Go for it.
my model of the election map is very crude, and I'm hoping that you'll give it some more complexity. But in my head, there's basically outer borough homeowners, more car-centric, often racially diverse. A lot of them are black. This is like the core Adams voter. And there's a lot of people like this. This is, if you live in the sort of Upper West Side bubble, these are neighborhoods that you don't always go to or know people from, but the city has tons of people.
It runs on people who live there. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. And then there's the bubble that you and I are in, which is educated, liberal, Upper West Side, Upper East Side, Brownstone, Brooklyn, people who read the New York Times religiously, watch MSNBC, vote for, and I'll say the first group, loyal Democrats, but also pretty noticeable swing towards Trump in the last election in some of these neighborhoods,
Right.
whereas that is not true on the Upper West Side or in Park Slope. These are people who, on one hand, Harris plus 1,000, but also have reservations about good, like the far left, and care a lot about good governance, and really admire Michael Bloomberg, for example, generally, although of course painting with a broad brush. And then there's this third emerging group, which is like me and my friends, which is this sort of young people in Williamsburg, in Astoria, in these new, like 20 to 30, probably college educated, but like pretty, and also like skewing pretty white, and very much more open to DSA politics and socialism, and much more online, and much more influenced by TikTok and things like that. So those are my three groups, and you've already sort of said this, but my impression, and this is I'm plagiarizing you
No,
brutally,
go for
but
it. It's all good.
like this is all from things you've written. My impression is that, and you said this already, that the Cuomo has sort of an inside straight because, that's a bad analogy. Inside straight, you don't always win. He has better cards than his opponent because he is going to dominate coalition number one, the outer borough racially diverse homeowners. He's going to do fine on the Upper West Side because everyone remembers COVID fondly and everyone, watched those press conferences. And the third group is pretty insignificant. There's like, we don't really vote that much. We don't show up. We make up like, less than 10% of the electorate. And what Mamdani is counting on is group number one is demoralized. It's an off-year election. They don't show up the way they showed up for Adams. Two, people my age are more mobilized than ever, and there's secretly twice as many of us than people think. And three, not to make it all about me, but all of my parents' friends read my blog and decide not to vote for Andrew Cuomo.
Right.
So I've always thought that's like pretty unlikely until like 2 weeks ago when it felt like, oh my God, it's all happening. Like turnout in these neighborhoods seems like it's through the roof. There's this poll that shows that he's in the lead. Like, so what am I missing here from those three groups, and complicate that image for me?
I don't think you're missing a lot. I mean, ironically, I think what's really great about New York City politics, otherwise, is that you can like break the city down into however many or few things that you kind of want, depending on the topic. So, no, I mean, I certainly agree with that. I think the one let me complicate that for you, is that I think if Zohran Mamdani's to beat Andrew Cuomo, he needs to do really well in Hispanic neighborhoods, better than any, like a Bernie 2020 level performance there. And I think that is, Cuomo is not only weak with kind of the Asian electorate, whereas East Asians without Andrew Yang on the ballot, there's a real chance that like voter turnout could significantly diminish in those areas. When he ran for governor, turnout was not very good. And obviously, I think the South Asian electorate growing, I'm not expecting blockbuster numbers there, but I think they will turn out more than they have for Mamdani. But Adams also did really well in Hispanic neighborhoods, particularly lower income Hispanic neighborhoods in the Bronx. And I think that is where Zohran, with kind of that economic populist class-based message, with all the pending ads with AOC, that is a place where you can whittle down Cuomo's lead. And I think to the extent that he can do that, I think will really kind of shape the margin of this. I don't think he can win without making it pretty close in Hispanic areas.
So is it that he needs to have a turnout surge among more socialist AOC
yes,
inclined people, or is it that
he needs the
would it
turnout
be
surge?
okay?
Yeah.
So it wouldn't suffice for just there to be like shockingly low turnout in those neighborhoods.
I think, yeah, so that's a great question. I think as the Democratic Party kind of realigns towards more people with college degrees, I am anticipating that like primary turnout in Hispanic and Asian neighborhoods will decrease. But when people talk about like low propensity voters, like nationwide and broadly for general elections, they kind of have this image of like men of color, people of color, things like that. But in New York's Democratic primaries, the black voters are very, or I wouldn't say like they're super high propensity voters, but like the turnout is very solid. And I think what Zoran is not like betting on people who, I think betting on younger college educated voters to show up is as good of a low propensity voter turnout bet as one can make in an election like this. I don't think I think he can win by keeping it close with triple primes and working class neighborhoods and then getting that low propensity non-voter surge in the base neighborhoods, and also, yeah, and
Wait,
just
super sorry.
yeah,
What
no,
is
go
triple
for it.
prime?
Tri- Great question. Let me not use all this insider lingo. Triple
No,
prime
it's
is
great.
like you voted in like three of the last 4 or 5 primary
Got it.
elections. So it's just like these are people that come hell or high water, 100 degrees on election day, that's what the prediction is now, according
No
to
way.
forecast. Yes,
Wow.
which is bad for Cuomo, but who knows? But come hell or high water, we know these people are going to vote. And also it's not just like Zoran's base areas, Astoria, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Fort Greene, Sunset Park, et cetera, where you could have that low propensity college educated voter surge. Plenty of those folks live in Manhattan as well. Their voices are more muted in these higher turnout environments where the electorate is older, but you get a little juice from them too, and then all of a sudden he could win the West Village. He could keep it close in Yorkville. He can win Harvey Epstein's assembly district, which is like has a lot of like really wealthy parts of Manhattan, but also like Stuytown, the East Village. It could get weird. It could get uncomfortable for Cuomo. And I think what's been interesting about the past couple of weeks, Cuomo, I still think is favored to win, but he's kind of in that danger zone. And that's why they're blanketing the airwaves, with $10 million in carpet bombing advertisements, is because we're in kind of shit gets weird territory where, you could have turnout fluctuations and that could be enough to or like a cross endorsement here, a cross endorsement there, and like then it gets
Michael
weird.
Blake today. I don't think that's going to do it, but
I don't know. I don't know. All eyes are on Adrian Adams, and I think there's been a really interesting kind of moment here with Adrian Adams on the Working Families Party slate, but then you have some staffer. I bet it was not her who sent the tweet, but I'm sure
right.
maybe she thumbed up the message in the group chat, but basically for those who don't know, she sent out a tweet, quote tweeting something Zoran Mamdani said in praise of AOC about, abolishing ICE and things of the sort. And she was basically like, we do not abolish agencies. This is the Trump playbook, da 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 da. And I would say it backfired. It was kind of a
Well,
comms master class in how to like piss off all the wrong people. But
I was
go
going to
ahead.
say, like, I'm not representative, but I know 5 people who won't vote for her now because of that tweet. But
But I mean,
obviously,
yeah,
like, that means nothing. But
right. But that was kind of bad. Then you also have, the next day you have some anonymously placed quotes from someone close to Adrian Adams being like, "Oh, she has to be a moderate. The divorce is coming." Da 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 da. So I think all eyes are on, will she endorse? Will she do a cross endorsement with the slate? Will she not? I firmly believe that she wants to beat Andrew Cuomo at all costs, but I will say I don't know if everybody in her circle feels the same way. You know,
right.
a Zoran Mamdani mayorality that would present like a lot. There are a lot of people who have like business who rely not just on consulting business and political business, but just like lobbying and things like that. And he is like a real threat to that. And people, when their checks are on the line, they pull out all the stops. So
That's super interesting. One more map question, though.
go for it.
In that model, I basically gave the first group, the outer borough black homeowners, to Cuomo. To what extent have you seen, or do you imagine there being like some, even if it's like 10, 15%, or 20 or whatever, like some closing of those margins towards Mondani with the hype that he's been building online? And I mean, you can't get to, 48% in the polls the way that he has
Right.
on, like, surely some of these people are
Yeah.
hearing about freezing the rent and fast and free buses and are interested. Like, I guess a better way of asking this question is the Cuomo 1, Mamdani 2 voters who are like, I actually like both of these guys a lot. Or the Mamdani 1, Cuomo 2 voters, who are they, and Where are they, and how much do they matter?
Great question. So I would guess, we don't quite know, but I would guess that like Cuomo 1, Mamdani 2, or Mamdani 1, Cuomo 2, I would guess those numbers go crazy in Hispanic neighborhoods, like Upper Manhattan, the Bronx. I bet that's really interesting. I don't, again, we're like, this is a lot of gut here. I don't quite get a sense that there's a ton, there would be a ton of that in black neighborhoods. I think if you're Zoran Mamdani, right? Like the East Flatbush Assembly District, the Canarsie Assembly District, the East New York Assembly District. These are ones where like Eric Adams head to head against Garcia, it was like 92-8. I mean, that is like a bloodbath. That's even more than a bloodbath, right? That can't happen. Like you can't win. You can't win having that happen. It's like 70-30, 65-35, doable, totally doable. Like those were kind of the margins that Brad Lander had against Corey Johnson. That's doable. There's a huge difference between losing by 80, losing by like 30 or 40. And I think if you can keep it to 30-40, right? Because I mean, also, this was really interesting, right? The Data for Progress poll, the black crosstab, it's 75-25. But you look at the Data for Progress poll from 2021, the one that basically had Garcia and Adams neck and neck, the simulation, and it's also 75-25. So it's like, we know how 75-25 in that poll like worked out. It can't be 90-10 anywhere. It needs to be 70-30. And I think with an Adrian Adams cross endorsement potentially, or just like more paid media, that's in play. My worry though is that outing myself as someone who doesn't want Cuomo to win. Shocker. Worry is this $10 million in advertising blitz. It just kind of drowns out. And I think the canvassing operation they have is very robust and phenomenal. But you generally mostly canvass the areas that you're going to do well in. You want to create new voters, pull people out. If you have less like canvasser density in like, some of these neighborhoods farther out in the outer boroughs, it's harder to kind of do that, because also you need people who are canvassing to look like the neighborhood. That is like actually in my experience one of the most important things to kind of communicating the message effectively. So.
Right. That's super interesting, though, is that so you're putting a lot of weight on, get out the vote, door knocking operation.
I will put a decent amount of weight on that in base areas, but I do think, there's a whole debate on the left, like comms, doors, both. They've done both really well, but the communications, I do think that is probably maybe number one why there's been such a breakthrough. I completely agree. But for as amazing and media savvy as he is and as their team is, when you're getting pummeled with $10 million in advertising, that competitive advantage beyond digital spheres is kind of reduced, right? Because you're just being drowned out. Whereas this foot soldier army that basically they have 40,000 volunteers or whatnot, that is a competitive advantage that even the Bloomberg super PAC cannot undo, right? So I think if that can be targeted well, close the election, particularly given that it feels like 102 degrees next Tuesday.
That's crazy. I haven't heard that anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I checked the weather yesterday. I was like, oh my goodness, because I'm planning to be out all day, and now I'm rethinking that plan.
Right. And you said that favors Mamdani, that's bad for Cuomo.
I think it's bad for Cuomo because Cuomo is, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you. Cuomo is he's very much kind of outsourcing this get out the vote operation to labor unions, to the clergy network, to basically like his network. And his network is very vast. I think this is I don't know if you've read Thomas Dijk's book, like New York, New York, New York, and it's about how we're becoming a city of networks. I think this is a good distillation of kind of those many things. But I think if I'm them, they're very confident online, as I'm sure they have every reason to be. But I think they've been a little overconfident in terms of they're leveraging a lot of his votes on election day. And if election day, if it's triple digits, that's not like if I'm I'm not going to want to go outside, and I'm 26 years old. If I'm 65, 70, and my polling place isn't in my development, which in some cases it is, some cases it is not, particularly in the outer boroughs, they're more sparsely populated, I might just miss it,
Totally.
And I think there's a real risk in leaving it to one day. Weird shit can happen. So.
And the early vote probably skews Mamdani, you'd think. That's like,
Yeah, I mean, I get pushback from Cuomo aligned people on this, but the map to Zoran winning is that the early vote, it comes a lot from Manhattan and Brooklyn. Obviously, not all Manhattan is created equal, but you need the surge there. You need to be like, I'm just betting that higher turnout is good, right?
right.
Because then we're betting on the lower propensity voters. And I mean, through 2 days, we'll see. It is very much kind of greater borough by borough differences than even last time, and that's something to monitor. I'm sure I'll get clowned next week if he loses. Then people say, "Oh, you were
Right.
talking about Brooklyn's at 35%." But these are kind of the ingredients that you would need to do something historic. But we'll see.
Right. So,
Sorry, one last thing.
yeah, keep going.
He has ran close to like a perfect campaign. But
Right.
even getting that far, he still needs like 5 or 6 more things to break his way. That is a
But whether
reflection of the
being
challenge.
102 on election day could do it. Or it could be one of the five things.
Yes, could be one of the 5 things. It really
So
it's
funny.
threading of the needle here.
Right. All right. So I'm wondering if you could just take a step back and tell us a little bit. You mentioned like this is from my gut, but as you say, you're willing to, actually give precise predictions about like this neighborhood's going to do this and this neighborhood's going to do this. How do you come up with that? Like I know that you like are doing exit polling right now. I know that you generally as a reporter are like out in the streets like knocking on doors and talking to people. But do you also just like have like a perfect mental map of how every single election for the past 8 years has gone, or are there other data sources that you look at? Are there like what are some high signal indicators that you look for that we should keep our eye out for over the next so that we can improve our gut?
That's a
What's the
great question.
kombucha of
Yeah.
of New York City politics right now?
So I'm trying to keep it relatively simple now, right? I have a spreadsheet. Every assembly district, like I've got some racial and past election stuff in there, but like I know in my head like what it is. I don't have to look. And I have the voter turnout from 2021 of the final 4 candidates because it was a little higher, but then like there were a ton of people who did not rank any of the final 4, so I'm like I kind of put that aside.
Totally.
I look at the final 4 turnout, and then I also look at the ballot exhaustion percentages from going from final 4 to final 2, right? And then you can figure out a lot of things, right? There was some progressive drop off for Garcia where people just didn't rank her. There was tons of exhausted ballots after Andrew Yang was eliminated in Asian neighborhoods, things of the sort. And I've really just gone through. The first thing I did, I went through kind of every district, and I said, like, is turnout going to go up or down compared to this? And spoiler alert, I have it going up in a lot of districts, but by different percentages. I think in Zoran Mamdani's assembly district, I think it's very reasonable to think that voter turnout is going to go up 33%. It might go up 50%, but I'm not just going to automatically turn Astoria into the Upper West Side after one mayoral campaign. And I go through by turnout, and then I do what do you call it? And then I do the ballot exhaustion percentage. So it's just like how many ballots do we think have neither Cuomo or neither Mamdani? And that is like it's not quite guesstimation because we have the data from 4 years ago, but that's kind of a gut thing. And then I do that for every district, and then I just go one by one. Who do I think is going to win by how much? Rough benchmarks, and I just do it. I'm very fortunate that I've been able to spend at least a little time in like every assembly district in the city, except for the southern shore of Staten Island. I would love to get some good Italian food though, so I'm sure general election. I'm sure I'll find a way to get down there.
I love
Um,
that moment in the debate where
that
what's the borough you spend the least time in?
Yeah, and then Scott's like, I've been everywhere. I've been everywhere.
Yeah.
Lewis is like, okay, Scott, okay. That was very
Anyway,
funny.
sorry.
And I think I don't try and do anecdote. Like just because 20 people told me they were voting for Mamdani and 5 said they were voting for Cuomo, I'm not going to say that he's going to win that district by 80%. But I think you born and raised here, grew up, spent a lot of time out. I think you just develop like some type of feel, if not for politics, just in terms of like what is going on in these neighborhoods, like what is kind of the average day like, and I think I try and inform that. But also, I mean, we're fortunate that in New York we have a lot of competitive elections year after year, and they give us a lot of good data, and I certainly scrutinize that. But I mean, who knows? I might have egg on my face next week, but it's nothing too comprehensive. And then also I have the same exercise, but just for the first round of candidates, and then I go and then I have a separate sheet that does the ranked choice voting modeling. That's like a friend of mine said. That's like beautiful mind stuff or whatever. But it's
Right.
basically, you go in and right now it very much boils down to when the Adrian Adams ballots are exhausted or are run off and the Brad Lander ones are run off, kind of what type of percentages go to Mamdani, because if
So
you
that
can
was
keep
literally my next question.
perfect, there
So
you go.
it's a two-parter, but take me into that spreadsheet.
Hell yeah.
One question number one is what is the Cuomo Mamdani first ballot margin? I assume Cuomo is going to beat Mamdani on the first ballot, and then if he has any shot, Mamdani's going to have to catch up with second place votes from other people. But what is the biggest margin that you think Mamdani can realistically make up? Can he make up a 10-point gap in the first ballot? Can he make up a 15-point gap in the first ballot?
Oof. Okay.
Um,
I'm
and
gonna.
then
Yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
take your time if you want to get
No.
materials out. I'd love that. Or if you just want to say something in low confidence is fine, but I'm just interested in your take on that. And then secondly, it's sort of the same question, but what percent of Adrian Adam votes do you think he needs? Like, what's the margin, and what are the numbers that you think he needs? That you think Mamdani needs to have a shot?
I got you. So I'm gonna throw some cold water on this real quick. 10%. Garcia almost came back from 11%, but Garcia was like a ranked choice voting unicorn. 10%. If
Got it.
he's down 10% in the first round
It's
against
over.
Cuomo, like I would have a bad, like that would just not be good. I
Okay.
think you want the margin to be 5 or less.
Wow.
I
Okay.
think over 5 it starts getting weird. I yeah, I think you want it 5 or less. That's kind of, I mean, I have to do some adjusting. I think Brad getting a boost recently, I think that'll help Saran, but I think you want it under 5. So much hinges on kind of Brad Lander's vote and how many people do not rank either Zoran or Cuomo, but rank the other candidates. I didn't speak to anybody who had that case, but I only spoke to like 40 people. So it's like, and also there are a lot of silent voters, things like that. I think that's really where it hinges. I think in terms of my calculations or research, I think that of the Adrian Adams vote, now that's interesting. Everyone, when we think of Adrian Adams, think of like the Rochdale senior citizen who's going to vote. But Adrian Adams is actually good. She might pick up a lot of first place ballots. Not a lot, but like a healthy amount. Parts of Manhattan, parts, professional class parts of Brooklyn. I think that if you can keep the Adrian Adams ballot runoff to like Cuomo gets like 40 or less percent of that with like let's say 20% of those ballots exhaust or like 15%, right? I think if you keep the Cuomo runoff to like 40% and Zoran can get 30% of those and then like Brad gets the rest. I think that's a doable equation, you know? But the Lander ballots, you need low exhaustion. Like you can't some of these surveys like it's like 30 or 40% exhaustion. You can't survive that. You need like 25% or less. And exhaustion, for people who don't know, is just when the voter has none of the remaining candidates ranked on their ballot. You need that at 25 or less, and you need like the Mamdani to Cuomo ratio to be like 2-1, but like more than 2-1.
Right.
You need like a 60-20 and then like 20% exhaustion. You need something like that, which I think is in play, but like that's a tall order because
Yeah.
I think Wiley to Garcia was like 65-15 or something. It was like a blowout. The progressives, the leftists, they are like very ideological. You can like count on them to do it. 3-1, 3-1's tricky. I think it's in play, but it's not a slam dunk, you know.
Right.
And the election probably hinges on that.
Right.
Yeah.
So, do you remember in 2021 what is the actual election night experience with this? Like when, 20% of a neighborhood is in, do we see the full our like ranked choice voting how that affects everything or
No, so you see no ranked choice voting until a week later. They just dump it all on you. They dump the whole thing. Like you go from just your first night results to like the next mayor, the Democratic nominee is like this person. It happens like it just the Board of Elections. They just release everything. Um,
and they're not going to show it on election night?
No. We will know no ranked choice voting simulations on election night. We will have,
Wow.
yeah. But I mean, and also like there'll probably still be some like mail-in ballots that haven't been counted, things like that. That normally helps like the more liberal progressive candidates by like 0.5%. But on election night, I think we'll know a lot. I'm really excited to see like the map on election night. But I remember last time like Eric Adams was up a lot, and it was like, oh boy, this is like kind of over. But then it almost wasn't, But I think the margin will have to be shorter this time. Yeah.
But just to be clear, there's a full week of silence. Like
Yes.
we get the election, and then for a week,
For a week we
the
wait.
internet is going insane,
Yes. Every
and
day.
so
Every day.
like if there's like
Great time for Substacks. Yes.
oh my god, so
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
there's gonna be a 6%, let's imagine that Cuomo gets 32% of the first ballot and Mamdani gets 26.
I mean,
Then we're all just going nuts for a week.
yeah, I basically have to write two different articles. Just leave
What do you
them on
mean?
hold. Write like a Cuomo wins and write a Zoran
Right.
wins, and then just leave them on the presses for Tuesday.
Wow.
That would actually probably be the most bizarre scenario. Yeah, I think this is we're
And at that point, there's no point in advertising. There's no, it's out of
no
our hands. But it's just the
totally
robots.
totally
That's
out.
crazy.
I think we'll be able to do like some good vibes guesstimations kind of, because I mean
Right.
we will have some good numbers from like all the assembly districts and things like that. I think it'll be pretty instructive, and I think we'll be able to parse some stuff out. What will be interesting is that on election night, when the early vote comes in like 9:02, 9:03, like Mondani could like easily win the early vote, and I think that would be a wild start, whereas like then the
Redshift.
Cuomo, yeah, kind of reverse 2020, right? Like
Right.
kind of, yeah, where you could have that. I think Zoran, I hesitate to say must or needs to, but I think he would be greatly advantaged if he won like to win the whole race, he has to win the early vote.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Man. Okay. The last question, looking beyond the primary,
Okay.
what is your, obviously, in the event that Mamdani wins, Cuomo is going to run in the general. I imagine he's going to be wounded. I think it's going to be very embarrassing for him to have not won. And I think a lot of people who have supported him sort of de facto, sort of like, okay, obviously he's the default person. He's going to win. I think that he's going to bleed some of that. And
Yeah.
Adams is going to have a real opportunity to scoop some of that support up.
Oh,
But he's still going to be probably, a meaningful contender in the general election. And he still probably is going to have more money than God. Reverse scenario, how narrow does in the final round, does a Cuomo victory over Mamdani, how narrow does that margin have to be for Mamdani to have a credible case of saying, I'm running on the Working Family Party line, I have a shot. This was a very close election, and in 4 months, there's going to be two other candidates, there's going to be Republicans, and I'm going to have 4 more months to get my message out and knock on more doors. We can do this. How close does it have to be for that to be credible? Obviously, if he loses like 60-40 or anything like that, I think people are going to be like, you had your shot. Like, clearly this is not working. Let's try something else.
I think within 5 or 6.
Okay.
I will say that I think it would take an act of God for the Democratic nominee to lose the primary in November. I think even if Zoran Mamdani wins the primary, that is a crowded general election. Andrew Cuomo, Eric Adams, Curtis Sliwa. And I think the Democratic Party ballot line, while there is disgust with the party to a certain extent, it is still powerful. That the ballot line is still quite powerful. And I would not see even Cuomo with more money than God losing a primary and then all of a sudden winning a general when he has 2 more people taking votes from him.
Right.
I think for Cuomo to lose the primary, it will mean that he will have to bled support in Manhattan. And the way to win a general election as a third-party candidate is to break into Manhattan. And I just don't see Cuomo as an independent winning Democratic registered voters in Manhattan that he had lost 4 months ago. And I think, I'm sure, depending on the margin, there will be some appetite for a Working Families Party ballot line, but I don't really see a path there, even for someone as talented as Zoran. I think it's just, I think the Democratic nominee wins the race. I think the only way it would get really weird for if Zoran won the primary would be like if somehow Eric Adams and Sliwa got pushed out, or like it became like a one-on-one or something like that.
Right.
But I don't think any of the three of them. Sorry, Jim Lawton, I don't mean to leave you out, but Anyway, I don't think any of the three of them have any incentive to bend the knee to the other and get out.
Right.
They all hate each other,
Cuomo, Adams, Sliwa.
Sliwa, yeah, like they all loathe one another. Like Eric Adams is not backing down to Cuomo. I think there would have to be some like really powerful entity that like gets them in a room and is like, hey, one of you is like coming out, the other two are like going down to body bag or something, metaphorically. Of course.
Doesn't that work in Mamdani's favor in that scenario though? That like
I think
sneak in with.
Yes, I think if you're Mamdani and you win the primary, you want a clown car of people running against you. You don't want a one-on-one. One-on-one, it gets weird. One-on-one, it's like then one-on-one plus like $100 million against you. Then it gets then it gets strange, Right. But I think Cuomo would be a wounded candidate,
Right.
We'll see.
Well, I'm imagining the Buffalo mayor the election in 2022 where
but that was a one-on-one though, Yeah, people are traumatized from that, but it gets context, weird when there's a one-on-one. Yeah, go for it.
India Walton was the socialist candidate who upset the incumbent Democrat mayor, Byron Brown, and then Brown came back in the general, and with both his moderate base and then with more conservative voters, he managed to defeat her without being on the Democratic line. And so
he basically just swamped her in like all the white ethnic areas, and then the black neighborhoods were like, she won them, but like they were like relatively close, or like not. She didn't blow them out there, and then just got crushed everywhere else. Yeah, New York is. I mean, I would, from an academic perspective, I would love some type of contested general election. Like that is kind of a sicko's dream. But that's
what the headlines of this is going to be, by the way.
Sicko's dream.
A sicko's dream.
Oh, I love that. That's great. But I mean, I would bet on the Democratic nominee.
Yeah,
regardless.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No hot takes there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for jumping on. I'm so eager to read your coverage over the course of the next week, and then in this limbo week in between election day and when they actually run the race. I mean, that's going to be
that's good. That's big for me. No
that's
sleep.
Going to be a big yes, absolutely. I'll try to get in there and write my own blogs and take advantage of the moment.
Hell yeah. We can cross post. We'll do something fun. Yeah, thank you for having me.
I would love that. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been so great to talk to you and to meet you officially. And I can't recommend your Substack to my listeners highly enough. I think that you will not get a
likewise with yours. I'll go on my page, and I think I can do recommended now. So
that would be amazing.
Gotcha.
Thank you so much, and talk to you soon. Really excited to all right, talk soon.
Talk to you in a minute. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Primary School. Primary School is hosted by Eli Miller, produced by Oliver Heller, Lucy Ackman, and Sean Heaney, edited by Sean Heaney and Jonathan Jalbert. The opening theme was composed by Sean Heaney, and the cover art was designed by Charlotte Heller. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Primary School NYC. And as always, remember to vote in the New York primary elections on June 24th.